This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. Hey, thank you so much for tuning in. Whether you're a longtime listener or maybe just testing the waters, see how far the crazy goes on this guy. You might be surprised, so buckle up. I do appreciate you giving it a shot here, and I will try my best to make it worth your while today. This show exists for the purpose of encouraging people to think clearly and independently, not so much to agree with everything that I share, but simply to own your worldview, and don't be content to allow your attention to be focused on the things that news organizations or politicians or social media influencers or other platforms of information are trying to keep you hyper-focused on. Politics probably being the biggest, example of how we're just consumed with it. It's the most important thing anywhere in the universe, when really it isn't. Let me illustrate what I'm talking about here. Just a little perspective, if you will. According to society, luxury is things like cars or expensive clothes or lavish jet-setter lifestyle. Do you want to know what real luxury is like, though? The real luxuries in life are slow mornings, freedom to choose, a good night's sleep, peace of mind, calm and boring days, being present, people you love, people who love you back. And the point here is these are not things to be acquired, but rather the results of a purposeful, fulfilling existence. So that's a little difference in perspective that I bring to the table. I'm not here to persuade you that one political party is the answer to all of our problems, or that, that I have all the truth that you need to know. But I will tell you from firsthand experience, in other words, I'm not asking you to do anything that I haven't been willing to do for myself. If you will discover what it is to have a purposeful and fulfilling existence, in other words, to find meaning in your life, let me say that another way, a sense of personal mission, everything changes for the better when you lean into that purpose and mission and start living your life as if there was something that you alone can fulfill. It takes the pressure off of having to compete with everybody else. You don't have to compare yourself to everybody else, and you don't have to see if you're keeping up with the Joneses. Well, they got a new SUV. I guess now we got to go get one, or we need to up the ante and get a boat or a side-by-side or something. It's about becoming the best version of yourself. And if you do this with the idea that it's not about building a monument to yourself so much as using whatever tools God has provided you with and whatever it is that gives you that sense of happiness and purpose in life, and you use that to try to bless the lives of the people around you, I promise you, you will find happiness and satisfaction regardless of what is going on in the world. No matter what the difficulty level has been dialed up to. And by the way, you've noticed it's getting cranked up pretty good here lately. Last few years have been something for the record books. But if you approach life like this, and for those who are believers, if you approach it with the humility to ask for God's help, to figure it out, and to put your feet on that path of purposeful, fulfilling existence, He will help you. It's hard because basically you're turning the steering wheel over to Him. Okay, go ahead. take the wheel and, take me where you want me to go. And He does not take the safe, boring, belt route. He takes you into adventurous places that are uncomfortable. And there's purpose behind that. That discomfort is where you're growing. That's where you get tested. That's where you find out there's more to you than you thought there was. And I realize why not everybody does it, because I resisted it for a long, long part of my life. I didn't want to do that. I want comfort. I want, routine. I want to know that everything is predictable and today's going to be pretty much like yesterday. That's the calm and boring days. But calm and boring days in a purposeful life are a lot different than the calm and boring days of someone who's essentially become a wage slave and who thinks that they exist just to go earn a paycheck and then buy stuff and, try to impress the people around them with, look what I got, hey. Sorry, I'm a little philosophical starting out today. Hope that isn't off-putting to you, but it means the world to me to be able to share some of the things that have helped bring not just a sense of happiness and satisfaction, but actually peace and a sense of confidence to my life. Not that I'm all that, okay? You understand? You'd feel good if you stood next to me. You'd be like, hey, the contrast and comparison thing, this is working in my favor. Come stand closer, Bryan. You're better looking. You're going to beat me in every possible way. But the nice thing is, when you are leaning into that purposeful life, you don't have to compare yourself to other people. Your sense of self-worth doesn't originate from what everybody else is going to think about you. Which leads me to the first article I want to share with you. This is from Paul Rosenberg, How to Gain Confidence and Courage. Now, I believe he wrote this several years ago, so he's re-released this. And if you haven't discovered his freemansperspective.com, I would so recommend this. Sign up for it. He'll send you emails. I think he sends them out pretty much daily. And this guy has a deep, deep well of wisdom and knowledge from which he draws. And there's just something about his message that really resonates with me. I think it's because it's presented with a very loving, easygoing, and yet common sense kind of spirit. You don't get the sense that he's lecturing you and wagging his finger. He's inviting you to discover there's more to you than you thought. And yet there's serious wisdom here. Let me give you some examples. So on confidence and courage, Paul says, all of us enjoy feeling confident, or at least we dislike feeling confused and weak. Now, we also like feeling like we've been brave and not cowardly, but he asks, how do we get these things? And he says, if you're at all like me, how to get them was never really explained to you. It all seemed like magic. Either you have the secret ingredients or you don't. But he says it doesn't have to be that way. So let's start with the basics. This is, first of all, let's define the terms. Confidence is an opinion that you hold about yourself. It would have to be, wouldn't it? You either believe that you are able to do a thing or you don't. Courage is your ability to make decisions and hold to them in the face of fear. In other words, courage is about what you do, not what you feel. Someone who feels no fear at all in the face of danger isn't brave, they're delusional. So let's start with building courage. Paul Rosenberg says, confidence and courage are not magic. They are built just like most other aspects of human character. Do you want confidence? Do you want courage? You can have them, but you have to develop them the old-fashioned way, by working on them. And by the way, he says this is the only way you'll ever get them. The fast and easy methods of building character traits don't work. They are empty promises from people who have something to sell. These groups will offer you something that looks and feels like confidence and courage, but only if you're inside of their group. So he says, don't fall for it. Real confidence and courage come from inside, not from outside. So let's start with specifics on getting confidence and courage. We'll start with on courage with a quote from John Wayne. Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. Paul says this is true. Courage is your ability to act in the face of legitimate fears. You have to build this ability just like you build your muscles. That means you start at a low level of courage and you build up to a high level. So if courage is built, then something else is true. To act cowardly does not make you a permanent coward. So imagine a weightlifter who can lift hundreds of pounds, but when he started, he failed many times to lift a fraction of the amounts he lifts now. He only became a champion after he decided not to quit, even when he failed repetitively and things got very hard. Well, it's the same with courage. If you face a scary situation and act as a coward, that's not the end of it for you. You can come back next time and do better, and come back time after that and do better still. After a long time, people will watch you and wonder, how can you have so much courage in the face of adversity? This has been done by millions of others, and you can do it too. But He says it requires consistent effort. Now, as for building confidence, he says, as I said earlier, confidence is an opinion you hold about yourself. If you believe you can do something, you are said to be confident. If you don't believe you can do it, you are not confident. Judging yourself is where confidence gets complicated. For example, many of us have vaguely decided not to acknowledge our abilities because we fear that people would dislike us for having them. Turning your back on your own ability might have made sense at one time in your life, like when we were children. But we must always acknowledge our abilities to ourselves, even if we hide them from the world. So the opposite problem, thinking that you can do more than you actually can, that's usually only temporary. Once you try, you learn the truth. But he says the second part of confidence is having ability. And this part is simple, but it's not easy. All types of ability are built by practice, from physical skills to making moral judgments. If you want ability, act. And as you continue to act, analyze your actions and improve them. Find your gaps and decide which abilities will be more or less important to you in the future. Keep acting and keep improving. Soon enough, you'll begin to be a confident person. In time, you'll be highly confident. And he offers this tip. He says, don't think that you should be able to do everything. You can't. No one can. There are simply too many things that are done in the world. No one has the time and energy to learn them all. So carefully choose the abilities you will develop and don't hesitate to say, no, I never learned how to do that. And he says, remember this. Other people's opinions of you don't matter very much. It's only when you accept their opinions that you suffer seriously. Now, maybe that doesn't float your boat like it does mine, but that just seems chock full of wisdom to me. I think that's some pretty solid stuff. And I think all of us need that reminder from time to time. We are living in a time where it really does take courage to move forward, courage to hold to your values, courage to not run with the crowd when you know the crowd is going straight off a cliff. You might think, well, I've never stood in that place before where I've had to choose. All I can tell you is it comes into every person's life. Every man, every woman, every child at some point finds themselves at this crossroads where you have to decide for yourself. Do I go along with something that is clearly against my deepest held personal principles? Do I do it just to maintain standing, in the eyes of those around me, to keep the peace, to avoid punishment or, persecution? Or do I have to stand up and separate myself from the herd? Some of you have been through that, maybe multiple times. You know what I'm talking about. It's uncomfortable. It's lonely. And it's pretty dejecting. It's a hard thing when you find yourself on the outs, especially when people who formerly were buddy-buddy with you turn their backs on you. But there's something to be said for the incredible peace of a conscience that is at ease. Can't recommend it enough. It makes up for a lot of other discomfort. If your conscience is at peace, my friend, you're doing something right. All right, two other quick articles I want to touch on here. The topic of capitalism. That is a word that is very, very poorly understood. And, people talk about, well, capitalism is the source of evil and it's the source of this and the source of that. Jeffrey Tucker, writing for the Brownstone Institute, has a remarkable essay. And it's a fairly lengthy one, but I want you to discover this for yourself. You'll find it in my show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com. These are the show notes for August 28th, 2024. It's titled, This Is Not Capitalism. Let me give you just a couple of quick excerpts here to give you an idea of what he's talking about here. He says the word capitalism has no stable definition and should probably be permanently retired. That won't happen, however, because too many people are invested in its use and abuse. Now, Jeffrey says, I'm long over trying to push my definition over somebody else's understanding, generally viewing disputes about vocabulary and dictionary definitions as a distraction against the real debate over concepts and ideals. So he says, what I'm trying to do here is not so much precisely define what capitalism is, but rather to highlight the many ways in which economic systems of the industrialized world have made a hard turn against the whole ethos of voluntarism in the commercial sector. So he says, let's pretend we can agree on a stable definition of a capitalist economy. Let's call it the system of voluntary and contractual exchange of otherwise contestable and privately owned property titles that permits capital accumulation, eschews top-down planning, and defers to social processes over state planning. So it's ideally the economic system of a society of consent versus a society where central planning makes all the decisions because somebody knows better than you do. Now, Jeffrey Tucker says, look, obviously this is an ideal type. So described, it's inseparable from freedom as such and forbids state planning, expropriation, and legal privileges for some over others. So how does the status quo match up against that? You know the answer, don't you? In uncountable ways, our economic systems utterly fail the tests with all the results that one would expect. So he lists out a short list of all the ways in which the U.S. system does not comport with some type of ideal capitalistic marketplace. He talks about how government has become the main customer of tech and media platforms, instilling an ethos of political deference and cooperation, resulting in surveillance, propaganda, and censorship. And he walks you through the process of how that happened. He next talks about how the U.S. now has a medical cartel that works with regulatory agencies and official institutions to impose poisons on the public, charge outrageous prices, cooperate with business cartels to block alternatives, and promote addiction and ill health. That may seem like a harsh assessment to some, but I don't think he's wrong. Also, he talks about the U.S. having an educational system that is mostly government-funded, that blocks competition, forces participation, wastes students' time, and pushes a political agenda of compliance and indoctrination. Next, he talks about agricultural subsidies that build vast industries that crush smaller farming and capture the regulatory apparatus and foist bad food on the public. He next points to a wildly complicated and confiscatory system of taxation that punishes wealth accumulation and blocks social mobility in all directions. He next points to a fiat paper money system, floating exchange rates that give the government unlimited funds and create inflation, and currencies that never rise in value, and provide foreign central banks investment capital to make sure international accounts never settle. Then he talks about a court system that invites extortionist litigation and can only be fought with deep pockets. Think about what's happened with Ammon Bundy, and you'll have a clear understanding of what he's talking about here. Litigation these days is merely about playing the long game in a wicked match that can be over absolutely anything, real or imagined, that any would-be plaintiff can assemble into a court case. Business people, especially small business people, live in daily fear of this constant threat. Next, he talks about a patent system which grants private industry production cartels and stops competition for everything from pharmaceuticals to software to industrial processes. He talks about authentic property rights, how they're weaker than ever and can be overridden or even abolished with the stroke of a pen, such that not even landlords can evict tenants or small businesses can be open for business. He points to a bloated federal budget that supports 420-plus agencies that lord it over the whole of commercial society, ballooning up compliance costs for entrepreneurs and creating vast uncertainty about the rules of the game. And by the way, he says, slight attempts at deregulation can't begin to fix the core problem. There is no product or service made in the U.S. that is not subject to some form of regulatory diktat. And if one does happen to come along, like cryptocurrency, it's beaten to pieces until only the most compliant firms survive the market competition. So these examples he's giving, he's not just arguing about the meaning of the word, but drawing attention to what everybody can surely agree is a hegemonic imposition on commercial freedom by state power, and sometimes, and even often, with the willing cooperation of dominant players in every industry. He says, I'm not sure that such a system has a precise name in the 21st century, unless we want to go back to the interwar period and label it corporatism or just plain old fascism. By the way, that's a legitimate definition of fascism. But not even those terms fully fit with this new mode of surveillance-based, digitized despotism that has descended on the U.S. and the world, one that provides healthy rewards for private enterprise that links up with state power and brutal punishments for those enterprises which do not. Holy cow, that is powerful. So again, check this out in my show notes for August 28th, 2024. You'll find it at thebrianhydeshow.com. One last article, since we're on the subject of economics. It's as good a time as any to clear the air regarding the free market and free enterprise. I'm including an article from Jacob Hornberger from the Future of Freedom Foundation, which talks about free enterprise and what the nation's system of free enterprise is. He says, how many people actually ponder the meaning of that term? And he says, my hunch is not very many, because I'd say most people favor America's free enterprise system simply because that's what we're taught to favor since the day they enter first grade in America's state-controlled educational system. But he says the true meaning of free enterprise is a system in which economic enterprise is free of government control, management, and regulation. That is what is meant by free enterprise. And that is clearly not what we have here in the United States. I mean, he talks about licensing laws, minimum wage laws, occupational licensure, zoned communities, certificates of need, anti-gouging laws, and so forth. Legal tender laws, sanctions, embargoes, trade restrictions, none of which are compatible with a genuine free enterprise system. Meaning, one in which there is a complete separation of economy and state. Well, I know we're trained, but people would take advantage. Would they? Do you just not trust the market? See, I trust the market. I trust people to make decisions. The companies that do the right thing and create value, they would flourish. And those that don't, wouldn't. Thanks again for joining me today.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show.